Hello, this is Mr. Clancy, and I wanted to make this is going to be a pretty brief video on a review guide, the review guide for your test. I'm calling this test number 4 since basically we've had 2 tests. I'm going to count the eco column project as your 3rd test. This can be your 4th test. You will find this in Unit 3. All right, Unit 3 module. All right, I'm just going to go over a few things. I have some notes that I'll highlight as well. And basically, you can take it from there. So everything is in the Unit 3 module. I can't emphasize that enough, including the study guide. The videos are there for you to look at. The answer keys for the POGILs that I have, the ecological relationships, the succession, the practice problems, and so forth. So anyway, let's I'm going to put one other one. So I look at your biodiversity. I would know some of the go over your free response question and answer key. You had a chance to do that earlier this week. There is a biodiversity video also that I would look at. It covers some of the basics on biodiversity. Succession, the succession POGIL. I would look at that. There's a video. You can just review that. I also have the notes, and you also have a quiz. I would take a peek at that. Basically, a couple of things on succession that we talked about. One was primary succession, where in effect you're starting with a pioneer community, you move up to a climax community through a series of stages. The secondary succession, all right, would be secondary succession is when you have a established climax community and it's disrupted. Forest fire or some other type of disturbance happens to it and basically kind of wipes it out or wipes out a portion of it. You can see plants have been destroyed and animals have fled the burnt out area. So kind of review this, make sure you've got an idea of the key differences between primary and secondary succession. That is important. All right. I would also know, I think I had a question here on deflective successions, which is really about in effect a human action, all right, that would basically, or an arthropogenic action. I'll call this anthropogenic, I should say. Anthropogenic action, which is man-made. So I would go through that, and I would make sure you're pretty clear on that. So look at succession for sure. I would look at the populations, formulas, and problems. I've got several problems there for you. Those populations were here with it. I would know the formulas. I'm going to expect you to know that the doubling rule of 70. Remember, if you know the percent increase on a given quantity, you can divide that number into 70 to figure out how many years it will take to double that quantity. The BR is the birth rate, DR is the death rate, the CBR is the crude birth rate, the CDR is the crude death rate, you remember. And I would know those formulas. Basically, the growth rate is equal to the birth rate minus the death rate. And if the remember the crude birth rate is, let's say it's example 10 per 1,000. All right, then you can also apply the same type of thinking to the crude death rate, but basically this would equal 1 over 100 equals 1%. And that equals the birth rate. So I would understand that relationship between the birth rate and the crude birth rate. The crude birth rate is in per 1,000. The regular birth rate is in percents of 100. All right. If I look at we did a few of these problems. I asked you to do the first 4 pages on these problems. Population density would be the number of people divided by the acreage. Beginning populations on islands last year. Kind of go through this. This problem comes off there with that. We had done this in class. Right here we figured out that there's the birth rate. This was 12,000 new children born. All right, for basically versus 250,000 people, which worked out to a 4.8% birth rate. The death rate was 10,000 people over 250,000, which works out to 4%. The growth rate is the birth rate minus the death rate, which is 0.8%. And the rule of 70 would be if it grows at 0.8% annually, 0.8% per year, I could take the rule of 70, divide that number into 70, and I could figure out that the population is going to double, in this case, in 88 years. So the rule of 70 is an approximation. You had 4 pages for that. Go over these problems. There are some sample problems if you want to practice some of these. I started a couple here with it on the additional problems. They're basically the same type of problem over and over and over, but do make sure you understand the difference between crude birth rate, crude death rate, and the birth rate, BR and DR as well. So you want to make sure you go through that. And again, you have an answer key with that will help you out greatly. The ecological relationships POGIL. I would definitely go through that. The relationships, we looked at the predator-prey. I think most of you guys have a real good understanding of the relationship between the predator and the prey. Did a real good job on that. I would also understand about symbiosis, the 3 different types of symbiotic relationships between organisms. There is mutualism, like a lichen, where both organisms benefit. There is commensalism, where one organism benefits and the other seems unaffected. And there is parasitism, where one organism benefits and the other one is harmed. So make sure you know those 3 types of symbiotic relationships. And we looked at there are some examples with that, kind of run through this. I would know the difference also between inter and intraspecific competition. Interspecific is competition between 2 different species. Intraspecific would be competition within one species. And there's a couple of examples here with different types of paramecium, so run through that. Again, we've gone over most of these. You've had a quiz in this, so at this point, this should be a review for you. All right. I would look at the population's growth POGIL as well. The factors that influence population growth, certainly births and immigration would increase it. Deaths and emigration would decrease it. I would also understand about the growth curves. Remember, we talked about survivorship curves, the type 1 survivorship, the rodents, if type 2, and type 3 basically would be the fish, insects, and amphibians. If you remember, the type 1 and type 2 are called K strategists. The type 3 are called R strategists. R is in reproduction. In other words, they basically survive. You can see this. They basically survive by reproducing huge litters, huge numbers. A lot of these R strategists die off before they ever reach reproductive age. The type 1 humans are just the opposite. We live much longer, generally past reproductive age into the post-reproductive age, and then start dying off after that. Survivorship curve. Go over the growth curves as well. Exponential growth. This is growth that's absolutely unabated by any kind of limitation at all. There's unlimited food, unlimited resources, and so forth. This one here, this is called an exponential or a J curve. This is called a logistic growth curve or an S curve. Basically, pressure begins to mount due to environmental resistance. In other words, as you reach this point, the carrying capacity, which is sometimes called K, something has to give. Okay, and the population numbers of whatever type of species it is cannot continue to grow. That's going to level off. All right, so those are some of the main keys with that. Make sure you go over most of you, I think, have a good understanding of carrying capacity. One thing I'm going to throw on here, review the term TFR. I'm going to have a question on TFR there. We did go over this in class, but this is just a review. This is called total fertility rate. Total fertility rate, and basically that's the number of children that an average woman has over the course of her lifetime. So that would be TFR. That'll differ with that. Make sure you understand what an age structure diagram is. I would definitely look at the Chapter 4 PowerPoint for these. So in effect, you could tie this one in here with that for sure. Strong tie, and just kind of glance it over. We looked at this 4 different types of age structure diagrams. We also had an FRQ with that. I would look at the industrial FRQ that we had. Chronic versus acute diseases. Chronic are basically always present. And the acute are present sometimes. Present at times. All right. And those are some of the main things. I would also go over, and I've included, make sure you go through the Chapter 4 PowerPoint. It's very, very, very good. You'll find it very helpful. Also, as we went over in class, make sure you do review and understand what the 5 stages of the demographic transition are. That would be stage 1, which would basically be right here before. Remember, this is the population growth. Birth rate is here. Death rate is here. Stage 1, both the birth rate and the death rate are high. You can see some of the reasons for this. I thought we had a good discussion on this in class. I sense you guys had a pretty good feel for this. Stage 2, you still have this is basically the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, if you will. When a developing country basically starts to develop, the high birth rate continues, but as a falling death rate. As the you've got lower child mortality, better public health, better nutrition, better cleanliness, stuff like that. Hygiene increases. Stage 3, you've got a continued falling, I should say, death rate. The birth rate also starts to fall as people have preferences of smaller families. It might be a preference. It also could be a financial necessity because it's more expensive to have kids. There's also changes in social trends and fashions. Stage 4 would be a low fluctuating birth rate and low death rate. Population growth is small. So in effect, the big difference between stage 3 and stage 4 is this is a falling birth rate. Whereas stage 4 is even a lower birth rate and a low death rate. So in effect, you've got very small population growth, changes in lifestyles, more women in careers. They're just not as interested in having children. So that's a key thing. And then stage 5 is actually where the death rate exceeds the birth rate, which, as we mentioned, we've had in some areas of Europe. And this carries a population decline. So the population growth, this was the one that was actually only recently diagnosed. All right. So the demographic transition I would go over. All right. Those are some of the main points. Make sure you go over it. I'd like to see you do a real good job. It will be multiple choice, and there will be one free response question on for you to answer. So I'm looking forward to seeing you excel on Monday. Thank you for a great attitude on doing the EcoColumn projects. I really appreciate that. Hope we got something out of that. And I think we did. I think we learned quite a few things with it. And I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Thank you very much.